Before we begin, thank you, Anna. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that even though we're meeting over Zoom, the university stands on the lands of the Lithuanian and Sanic peoples whose historical relationship with the land continues to this day. I'll let each of the panelists situate themselves, but I'm personally calling in from Lithuanian territory as well. We want to take this opportunity to invite everyone to reflect on how they can better support reconciliation efforts in their community, whether that's through activism or academia or both.
On behalf of the undergraduates of political science, thank you all for joining our Zoom panel discussion about the many pathways to grad school. This info session will consist of a set of questions answered by our 4 panelists, and then a question and answer period to conclude this year's grad school night.
We'll just get started by introducing ourselves. So I'm Chris. I use she, they pronouns. I'm a 4th year political science student, and I'm also director of student affairs for the UPS.
Hello, my name is Skyla. I use she, her pronouns. I am a 3rd year political science student about to start my honors, and I am the UPS director of elections. So with this being said, we will start by asking our panelists to briefly introduce themselves, and we will start with Dr. Feng Xu.
Hello, everyone. My name is Feng Xu, and I'm an associate professor of political science and grad advisor of the department. And I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you, Dr. Xu. And then we have Dasha.
Hello, my name is Dasha Gueletina. I use she, they pronouns. I'm a 2nd year Masters of Planning student at the University of Toronto on the traditional territories of the Haudenosaunee, the Wyandot, the Anishinaabeg, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. And I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you so much. And next we have Emily Hisser.
Hi, I'm Emily. I use she or they pronouns, and I am a 1st year MA student in political science at UVic.
Thank you. And finally, we have Michael.
Hi there, my name is Michael. I use he and they pronouns. I'm a 1st year PhD student in the Department of Political Science, as well at the University of Victoria.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. All right, so let's get started with our structured question period. So these questions are open to anyone, and I will be making sure we stay on time. And feel free to submit any questions, additional questions into our chat for the open Q&A session after. So the first question is, what does the process of applying to grad school look like? And what does that timeline look like? So could maybe one of our grad students start us off?
I can speak specifically to the UVic MA program. I think in a specific sense, it'll depend, your timeline will depend on where you're applying, because I think each program has slightly different dates, so that'll be specific. When I began planning to apply to UVic, when I decided that I did want to go to grad school, I started about a term and a half before I graduated to apply in September. So that was when I started just on my own. I'm kind of brainstorming what sort of projects I would be interested in, what I wanted to research, and started thinking about who I would want my supervisor to be. I was really grateful to have another faculty member kind of helping and advising me in that process. And at the time, I was also considering applying to other institutions. So I was also doing research about faculty in other programs in different schools, and reaching out to them about a potential supervisory relationship. I was advised to give any person that I was reaching out to as a potential supervisor like a number of months to kind of build a conversation and talk about your project and get to know each other a bit before the application deadline would come into place, if you're able to like start planning that far ahead and whatnot. I think, yeah, just giving yourself as much time as possible to really invest in research planning and personal interest exploration, because I think with coursework and stuff too, it can be hard sometimes to have time to just investigate our own interests and really sit with what we're personally interested in and what we're personally excited about. And so, yeah, just giving yourself like numerous months ahead of the deadline was something that someone else told me that I found really, really helpful.
Thank you, Emily. Yeah, I think as someone with ADHD, setting aside like lots of time in advance is something very difficult, but that reminder is so well taken and very much appreciated. Dasha or Michael, do either of you want to hop in on this question?
I don't have much to add other than just make sure you know what the dates are of the schools you're applying to. Have your complete list of the schools you're interested in this around this time. Have an idea of when those deadlines come up, just so that you, even if you don't dedicate that full time, you know how much you have, and it puts the amount of work that you're going to do into perspective. And every application is an investment of money, and it's an investment of your time and effort. So trying to be judicious with those applications and not applying everywhere, because that will be a lot of energy and time.
With that bit of information about money and time, and also Michael kind of alluded to this as well. Our next question is, what costs are associated with grad school? What about funding? What affects funding? If anyone would like to start, that would be amazing.
Yeah, so I guess I'll go. Funding is particularly dependent on what institution you're applying to and whether that institution is facing budget cuts, whether it's coming to some money, and also the department itself is going to be subject to X amount of money between graduate programs, so master's and PhD level. I would encourage folks to be aware of province specific scholarships. Like I have a BC scholarship, but I was automatically like that was like an automatic thing that I didn't have to do on my end. But I know in Ontario, that comparable one is something that the student applies for. So it's just being aware of that, being aware of private scholarships, whether the institution you're applying to has scholarships that you can apply to, or whether you're automatically considered for as well. As well as understanding, in case they'll speak more towards for master's students, if you are forging a potential relationship with a supervisor prior, what kind of research is that faculty member engaging in? Do they have money to support you through a potential research assistantship? Also asking the department that you're applying to, do they have guarantees for TA-ships? Stuff like that. Is particularly important because, as I'm sure we can all relate, the cost of living is particularly expensive, and universities are situated within metropolitan cities where, again, costs are expensive. So it's important to network and find these sources of money through the institution, supervisor, nonprofit organizations to help make life as comfortable as possible, because grad school is a much different beast.
Oh, I loved that answer. That was great. And I liked that you situated in BC as well as looking at other different provincial aspects of funding as well. So that's great. Is there anyone else that would like to chip into that question?
Go ahead.
Well, I think that's kind of connected to the last question, which is of course, you need to plan early. In planning early, you also can start applying for SHIRK for MA, because that is also, addition to your funding, right? If you got a MA SHIRK coming into an MA program, or if you get a PhD SHIRK coming into a PhD program, that will make your life, much, much better. So that's connected to the first question about cost. So yeah, I want to also add to the first question, is that in planning early, you also want to write to the people you want to write letters much, much early, right? To be kind of polite, because instead of say, 2 weeks before the deadline. So by the way, I'd like you to, we kind of have busy life as well. So, and also like you also want to have a gentle reminder, like a month prior or 2 weeks prior, just to make sure that, these people you asked, to write letters, say 4-5 months prior, haven't forgotten. So I think it's more of a, since you're asking people to do something, you have to, make the task easier. Thank you.
I have a slightly different situation. I'm in a professional program, which limits the amount of grants that are available because that's mostly for research opportunities. And there's very few stipends or shirk opportunities. So for a professional program, budgeting in a year, for me personally, a year to find the money in order to be able to go to school, that was something that that some people choose, or loans are much more likely for a professional program. And an additional element of cost is the cost of living of the city you're going to be living in. And even in a city like Toronto, there are things such as where I live, campus co-op. It's very affordable student housing, and there are little pockets of affordability in every city. It does require quite a bit of planning and personal research to find them, but it's not as dire regardless of where you want to end up.
And can someone please define what shirk is or expand on what shirk is for the audience? That would be amazing.
Yeah, sorry about that. It is a federal grant agency, and it's called SHIRK, stands for Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. And they give out fellowship for MA students and also for PhD students. They are separate. For PhD students, the department, like, speaking from our experience, the department will rank the applications and then move them to the campus. And then as grad advisor, I also participated in campus-wide ranking. But these applications I do are not students from our department, right? So they're from other departments. And then for PhD shirk applications, then based on the ranking, the university will move them to Ottawa. So then it will go through another set of rankings. Okay, for MA, we are given a quote, each university is given a quota every year. And then after the campus-wide ranking, so those, those who are falling within the quota, let's say 34, then you get shirk. Those below, you don't get shirk. So MA rankings are not moved to Ottawa. They are within university. PhDs, they are moved to Ottawa. And then as faculty member, we have shirk inside grant, shirk development grant. So this is basically the most competitive, one of the most competitive money fund for grad students. And then there's also postdoctoral fellowship from shirk. And the most competitive one is Benting postdoctoral, also given by shirk. Yeah, so shirk is that.
It seems like a pretty big deal in the graduate world. Alrighty, thank you guys.
I just want to jump in that just for tangibility, because people like the sound of money, unless it's changed, which it hasn't changed in like the last like 25-30 years. The shirk for master's programs, I believe, is $15,000 for a year, and then for the PhD, it's 20,000 for up to 4 years. And then is it 30 or 35? It's tiered in the PhD fund. You might know this. It's
yes.
Like 30 or 35 for 3 years max, I think.
Yes. And it's highly competitive, but if you don't play, you don't get it, right? So we still encourage every student to apply, and there are workshops, on how to write a strong application.
Thanks, everyone. I think that transitions well into like our next question. So what career opportunities can a master's or a PhD open, and what doors might it close? I don't know, Dasha, if you might want to start with this since yours is more of a professional degree. Oh,
Hi,
sorry, Dasha, you're
Dasha.
muted.
We would love to hear you, but you're muted.
Hello, sorry about that. I work for the federal government, and in my profession as a policy analyst, I passed around mid-level policy analysis. A master's is a big, it's not only is it a big help in getting a promotion, it's also very difficult to get a promotion without that. And you have to put in a lot more work, years of work and experience. It's frankly, it's like straight credentialism. But if you know the career that you want to be in, and you can identify an educational opportunity that will allow you to advance in that career and get more education and knowledge and learning, it's it helps accelerate things. But if that education isn't targeted, it can often not really yield a lot of benefits if it's not aligned with the profession you actually want to go in, because a master's degree is a huge privilege. It's a very rare educational opportunity. So being, again, very judicious about what you're applying for and why you're applying for it ensures that not ensures, but increases the likelihood that it'll lead to further career opportunities. But if it's just a master's for the sake of a master's, it might not bring as much benefit.
Thank
That's
you, Dasha.
such a
That's such a
good,
good point.
yeah, but also for like, what does a MA in political science, what kind of opportunities, does an MA in political science provide you? I think again, like if you are interested in working in government, I think an MA degree will help, right? And even a PhD degree in political science, I know in 2 weeks in a professional development seminar that Michael is part of, I've invited a senior civil servant to talk about how to navigate non-academic job market. Because, of course, when you are in the PhD program in political science, you want to be academic. But on the other hand, the job market for academic is really tight, has never been easy. Well, since the 60s, right? So we're also trying to get students to think, PhD students to think about non-academic jobs with a PhD degree. And I think with a PhD degree in political science and a position in provincial government, like you will get promoted really fast. We have quite a few students with PhD degree from political science who got a job in provincial government, in Attorney General's office, in Department of Finance. They got promoted really fast. So I think in the old days, I think if you have PhD, there might be a lot more doors which would be closed on you. But I think you can say with knowledge economy, MA, PhD degrees actually will open more doors for you. But I think I agree with Dasha that you kind of have to think clearly, like what kind of career you want to go into, because some career may not want you to have a PhD or even MA. Yeah. I don't have a first-hand experience, but that's what I've been hearing from students who have the PhD in political science and got into provincial government, and they really got promoted quickly.
Yeah, for instance, in the field I'm entering, planning, PhDs are not very common or sought after, and they're a really specific path. So knowing how much education you're signing up for, depending on the trajectory you're heading for. That I think that also plays a part in the calculus.
Yeah, and just to like perhaps to be a bit reductive, but for a PhD, it's either academia or industry. There's really not much else, but there is breadth in industry. You can work for the government, you can work for think tanks, you can work for nonprofits, you can be your own consultant within political science. Like there are opportunities. So even though it's like one or the other, like you do have a breadth of options. I will say though that sometimes within academic circles, if you're a PhD that goes into industry, sometimes you get frowned upon by other academics because it's like, oh, you chose the dark side. But as Feng said, it is particularly challenging in this day and age to find a tenure track position, and we all got to live, we all got to eat, and honestly, some industry jobs can be quite lucrative. So it's not like you're losing, financial stability by going into industry. It can actually be quite contrary. You can actually be quite comfortable.
Well, thanks so much, folks, for answering that question. Alrighty, our next question is, what's the difference between a thesis major research paper MA and a course-based MA?
I can speak to that a tiny bit, not in too much detail, but I could compare so far in my program, my own experience in the thesis stream versus that of a couple others who are doing MRP. From what I am understanding so far between us, the thesis stream has a little bit more of a structured pathway, and you go through like the entire like defense committee and defense process, where the MRP doesn't go through that in the same way. I also think there's a bit more flexibility with kind of like how and what you can write and kind of like how you can format that project. I think the structure expectations are a little bit more flexible, and there's perhaps a bit more creativity in that way. And Dr. Xu, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that if you do, at least at UVic, if you do the MRP, you take more course credits. I believe I know in the thesis stream, you only need to take 4 courses, and I believe in the MRP you take 6. So you get to do a bit more coursework, which I can see now that I'm going to be done my coursework by the end of this term. I can definitely see why folks would be interested in doing more coursework. I wish that I could do a bit more coursework, and I'm looking at adding the Indigenous Nationhood certificate for that reason. But I am also really interested in kind of like the publication opportunities and the more structured approach to the thesis option, which is why I chose that. But yeah.
Yeah, Emily, in case you want to go with major research paper option, you can still, right? So even if you were admitted on this MA thesis option, you can still opt for major research paper. I think you're absolutely right, because major research paper is not worth as many credits as thesis. That's why they need to take 2 extra courses. Major research paper does not have to go through defense, and there's no external examiner, right? So it's just your supervisor and a member. So in a way, major research paper can get you finish your MA quickly in general. Now, the question some students will ask is like, is there any difference between thesis and the MRP-based MA in, if I want to apply for PhD in the future? Not much. I did the MA and the PhD at York. MA at York University does not have thesis-based MA. It's just a major research paper, and they want you to get it out in 1 year. Go, right? Well, there is a practical consideration. We were talking about cost, right? And so people are not gonna, your employers are not gonna say, oh, is your MA thesis based, major research paper based, course based? None. You have an MA degree, right? So I think, you know, when you're thinking about doing MA, you need to take these into consideration. So do not be fixated on thesis, right? Because having said that, of course, there's a sense of satisfaction that you produced a thesis and you defend it, you know, so the plus and the minuses. I think the major difference is thesis and major research paper. And then there's also, of course, course-based, which, you know, you will take more courses because there's not even major research paper, right? And our department does not have that yet, but we might have to think about that.
It's really a question of if you want to do research, and if you're getting an additional education just for the knowledge or for advancement. Course-based is a great option. They're often shorter. Since this is a not public science, political science crowd, I love to plug public policy programs because a lot of them are course-based, and it's often more practical, the more practical applications of political science, and that was my personal path to getting here, and they're often more course-based.
I just also want to add, some students might be really interested in kind of intellectual ideas. I'm not saying that if you choose like course-based, you're not interested in intellectual ideas. Like takes time to marinate the ideas. Thesis might be your option, because I had one undergrad student who opted course-based MA in a different university, and he just hated that, right? Because it's so policy pragmatic. He's not into those things. So you kind of have to know what you want, right? If you're interested in theories, ideas, not policy, probably course-based is not what you want, right? I see major research paper is a kind of a middle ground.
Thanks everyone for those answers. I think that reminder, Dr. Xu, that like your employer is going to be asking if you what kind of MA you did is very important. I think some of us, like me especially, tend to like panic about those little things, but I guess in the end it doesn't really matter. It's more about what you want. All right, so I think it leads into our next question. So what factors should you consider when you pick a school or a program? And kind of the follow-up to that is like, why did you choose your school or program for the grad students in the room?
I can start that off. I did my undergrad at UVic as well. I feel like that's important context. I did a double degree in poli-sci and environmental studies, and I had never actually planned on going to grad school when I did my undergrad. No one else in my family went to school, and so when I was doing my undergrad, I had never thought about anything beyond that. It always was just kind of a moment of like, whoa, okay, I'm still doing it. I haven't failed yet. Awesome. And then I got more and more into it and was like, oh, I actually love this and I love academics. And I was really grateful that in my undergrad, I built a really incredible and really special relationship with one of the faculty members through an RA-ship around disability politics. And I was able to gain so much insight into kind of just like the functionings of academics, and kind of an inside perspective of what it's like working in academics, and just other opportunities, because I had only really just like been in undergrad courses, and it's such a different experience doing research assistantship work. And that was a really, really awesome experience. And so based off of that, I kind of started to understand a lot more about my personal interest in academics and what I was personally curious about and personally passionate about. And then I had a different faculty member approached me and asked me if I had considered applying to grad school or had looked into it at all. And I had said no, because I had no idea how to even start looking into it. Like, it had never crossed my mind as something that like I would be capable of doing or be interested in doing. And so with her help and guidance and stuff too, I really started looking into it. And I looked at a couple different schools. I considered Queens, and I looked at UBC briefly. But I realized that for me personally, the biggest reason that I wanted to stay in academics and go to grad school was because it felt like if I could have the privileged opportunity of learning being my job, that would be like an ultimate dream come true. It's one of my biggest passions in life, but the work that I want to do and want to continue doing through academics is so integrally community based for me. And the only reason why I would want to keep doing research and theoretical work and pedagogical work is so that I can access skills and tools and resources that I can then bring back either through myself or materially or directly or in any sense of the way, like bring back to work that I'm doing in my community. And so I didn't want to leave. I didn't really want to move away for grad school. It felt like it kind of, for me personally, defeated the purpose of why I wanted to go in the first place, because I had a project in mind and a perspective on how I wanted to learn and what I wanted to learn that was so based in a very specific relationship that I had with the person who's now my supervisor, and I still have, and the community that I have here and the organizing and community-based work that I have going on here, that I felt like if I left to go further into this work, it would kind of undermine the reasoning of why I wanted to do it in the first place. And so I chose to stay at UVic because I also, yeah, like have really strong relationships and I feel really supported here. And also housing. I love Victoria, my family's here, and I also kind of worried that if I moved away, I wouldn't necessarily be able to get back. So yeah, many different reasons, but they all collage together.
Just to jump in, I think other things to consider too is like, what are you going to get out of that institution? What are you going to get out of that program? No programs are created equally or the same. I know for myself, I have a master's in Indigenous governance from UVic as well. But what drew me to that program was not only the discipline, but it was the faculty, but also more specifically what the educational objectives were. What was I going to walk away from my master's? And it was the same thing when I was considering my PhD, which those like roles that each school plays is definitely a lot more intensified at the PhD level. For example, I'm not a Marxist, but if I was a Marxist, York might be the place to go because York is, the de facto Marxist school. So, those are things to consider. Sorry, Fun, not to out you. We've never had this conversation, but, I'm not saying everybody that goes to that institution is, but there are, generally speaking, there are reputations of the type of learning and that you're going to get out of it. For example, like UVic, if you are like super into like elections and election strategy and stuff, like UVic, we don't really have anybody in our department that's like super strong on that. But like, that's not a bad thing. We do political science differently than like U of T. For example. So those are things to keep in mind too. So not only just looking at faculty and what their research is, but looking at kind of the core educational goals through like required courses, whether electives, that will really help. But also too, like for me, picking political science here at UVic was a matter of, it came down to funding, and it also came down to my supervisor. At the PhD level, having somebody vouch for you to be your prospective supervisor is all the more important. That I would say it's even more important than getting into a master's program for folks who want to be in my position one day. But those are that's a really big thing to consider, because yeah, just like I think the key takeaway here is that no two programs are the same, despite having the same name.
To add on, I think it's in my experience, it was really helpful to go outside of my original idea, which was a master's in public policy. That was the path that was kind of clear and the obvious choice considering my career and my undergrad. But I looked at adult education, social work, and urban planning programs because they aligned really strongly with the clusters of interests that I had developed in the economics and public policy education that I got. And that really helped me solidify what I actually want to do with the education. And it helped me realize that urban planning is everything I want to do. And I found what I think is going to be a lifelong passion. And pushing outside of the confines of the expected path that you have and with your degree is really helpful because there's very few required courses in MA programs and humanities type programs that can't be made up if you don't have it in the first year of a master's. So be curious, be really think about what you want and what you're interested in, because there's a lot of different ways to get slightly different education that creates slightly different opportunities.
Alrighty, just for time's sake, I am going to just go to the final question, which is, how was the transition from undergrad to grad school?
I think that was how was the transition from undergrad to grad school. I can start. For me, it was a little tough because specifically, I thought that I could work and do grad school at the same time because I had done undergrad and work for 5 years. It was tough, but I did it. The graduate level is slightly different. There's a little bit more, not only difficulty, but also emotional weight that you put on the courses and the work you're doing, and when the jobs that you're going to be having are going to be more substantive as you get older, and those two things kind of collided and created some challenges that I'm currently overcoming. But it was different than undergrad. The courses were, I think, more interesting and engaging. The timelines were more relaxed, at least at my school. But there were some currents that I didn't keep as good a handle on as I could have.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest things for me was there are so many emails. There are so many, and they never stop. Every second there's another email, and they have to be replied to for very valid reasons. But the curve increase of emails is like obtuse. It folds back in on itself. There's so many. The second, I think, biggest adjustment or biggest learning curve for me was learning how to take a field course or how to approach a field course, which was, now I do kind of understand, but it was really hard and really interesting. Hard in a really generative way. Saying that it was extremely hard is not a complaint by any means. But learning how to learn a category or learn a field of study rather than learn events within that field. Like, for example, Canadian politics was one of my first field courses, and learning how to mentally approach learning what Canadian politics is as a whole rather than like instances of Canadian politics happening or things that happen within Canadian politics was a huge challenge. But I'm really glad for the skills that I've picked up from that. But that was a really, really big one, was learning how to learn bigger and broader. And in a generic way, I don't know if generic is even the right word, but to learn more broadly in a way that isn't necessarily less specific or less intentional. It was it reminded me that my brain is a muscle. And it was really interesting.
I think one of the big things that I've noticed as someone who's did a master's and now is doing a PhD and have watched a variety of people start this process. If you're like a thesis student, or if you come from another university, when you finish your bachelor's, you're in a sense on top of the world. You know, if you did an honors program with a thesis, like you've worked to this penultimate moment, you've got your accreditation, and then you're kind of thrown back into the bottom of the ladder again. And everything you think you know doesn't actually matter, in the sense of like the way that you have learned now needs to be challenged, and you're going to be pushed much further. I know UVic has a lot of seminar style courses in poli-sci. I never really did a seminar prior to my master's, and all of my courses are seminars. They generally are seminars in grad school. So it's not just like being able to regurgitate what you read, but it's about being able to critically engage and actually discuss your perspective on what you read. And doing that for 3 to 4 hours at a time can be a lot. It also is going to radicalize you in a lot of ways, and you're going to get frustrated at the world a lot, because you're looking at all of these like really amazing concepts, theories, practices, etc. academically, and then you look at the state of the world and you're like, what the heck? And it can also, kind of touching on a little bit what Dasha said, like the mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual toll is much different because you're being asked to do so much more. And that can affect like your personal relationships, your familial relationships, like your relationship with yourself. But like ultimately, like I think it's made me a much stronger person a lot faster, and it's galvanized me to get to the point to where I am in my life now. But I would be remiss if I didn't say that like it is hard, it is an adjustment, it will definitely shake a lot of the foundations of who you think you are, because it's something that you feel like you've done before, but like you have to experience it to really get it.
Looking from the other side, because the transition has been like was a long time ago, so I can't really recall much. I think one thing, the transition obviously from undergraduate to MA is you also have to be a teaching assistant. I don't know about Dasha, but in our department, right? So, you would just say, Emily, you were just finishing up, right? And the next, in the fall, you were on the other side. So I think there's also a big transition from being an undergrad student, going into tutorials, to then having to be a TA. Another thing I think, Dasha, you mentioned it, is that at the graduate level, somehow the deadlines, like it's more flexible, we're more tolerant, right? Like, yeah, if you want extension, go ahead. And they're not as scholar dream. And also they're just few courses, right? So that now, but the flip side of that is that you really have to do much better job at time management, because you feel like, wow, I have so much time, but you are actually quite, there are a lot of demands on you, right? But you have to manage time much better, rather than say undergrad, you take 5 courses and all these deadlines are thrown at you, but you have the deadlines. But graduates, as a grad student, you really have to manage your time much better than when you were undergrad. That's just my observation from the other side. I might be wrong.
Also, at least for my program, no exams. It's a completely different type of assessment process, and it's about the depth of analysis that you can reach rather than your ability to retain facts and figures and citations. And on the one hand, that relieves a lot of stress. On the other hand, it makes you more aware, and perfectionism is it comes up and bubbles up, and you deal with all these issues, and it's great. It's great.
Yeah, I mean, I'm speaking at a PhD level here. It's really nice not having exams, but also, yeah, the writing gets more intensified. I have about 60 pages to write in about a month here. And then I'm done my coursework forever, thank God. I've been doing this for a very long time. But yeah, so on one hand, it's like, cool, no final exams, that stress is gone, but you're now writing massive papers, and like that like 10 to 11 page term paper in your undergrad can be a standard like response paper to something, and you do that like 3-4 times, depending on the course and the instructor. Like, but yeah, writing is essential.
Okay, thank you for answering that question. That was really insightful. I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed the answers. I found the email part really funny, as I am pretty proud of myself when I've accomplished like 4 emails in a day. That is very funny to think about. So thank you all for all your wonderful responses. We will now begin our Q&A portion of the evening. We've collected a couple of questions from our wonderful audience, as well as we have a couple of additional questions as well. So panelists, feel free to answer as you wish. Yeah. I have not been given our first question, so I don't know what it is.
I can jump in, Skyla.
Perfect.
All right, so I think our first one is, what kind of student gets into grad school, and what kind of student succeeds in grad school? So maybe just any like best success kind of tips.
What kind of students get into grad school? Obviously we cannot speak, specific students, but at UVic, at least, I can speak about UVic. We're looking at, students have to submit personal statement, transcripts, letters of recommendation, and writing sample. I think these are the 4 documents. So we look at, the package as a whole, right? GPA, it's kind of non-negotiable. You've already done it. There's nothing much you can do about it. So we put a lot of efforts also to look at personal statement, because that really reflects, and specifically we want to see that the student really has a strong understanding where the research is and where the was and is going. Like we want to see, okay, why do they want to do this? Okay, because they did this, and then now and the future, right? And we're not saying that, you cannot change the research focus, but we want to see in that statement, there's a sense that you know exactly what you want to do. Because the statements we read a lot, which ultimately don't get them admitted, are the statements which are so broad. You want to do zillions of things in, it's like, what do they really want to do, right? So you have to really focus. Yeah, so I think we attach, so personal statement is something you really can work on, because transcripts, not much you can do. Letters, you cannot do much because it's not up to you. So I think the personal statement is really something you need to spend a lot of time on. What kind of students succeed? Perseverance and determination. Also, seek out help and support from your peers and faculty members. Just don't isolate yourself. And also time management. We can all learn how to manage time better. I'm sure there are other things I'm forgetting, but other panelists can add.
Yeah, I feel like some things that I have felt like really helped me succeed, and this is just in the context, not in a comparative context to my cohort or anyone else in the program whatsoever, but in a comparative context to finishing the first term of the grad program. I did better in my courses and in my GPA than I did in like any term or year of my undergrad. And I feel like some of the things that really got me to that point that I kind of started to learn towards the end of my undergrad, one of the biggest ones, I think, personally, just kill your ego related to your work and how you interact with other people in the program. Destroy it, get rid of it. This is a personal opinion, but I notice it functionally also in how I interact and how other people interact. When you are so preoccupied with how you are being perceived as an academic or as an intellectual, you're actually just going to block your own ability to learn if you're not ever willing to be humble and earnest in how you're approaching the material, approaching your instructors, or approaching colleagues and other people in your cohort. Just being willing to earnestly admit when you don't know is the only way that you're actually going to learn things. And I know that sounds like a really surface level take, but I think the environment that we're in, and with the commodification of education, it becomes a job. And in so many ways it is a job. And that really, I think, feeds into this desire to present yourself in a certain way and like be competitive in certain ways that actually are going to inhibit your engagement with learning in your own just like academic and intellectual journey. And I think for me personally, a huge breakthrough was breaking down those barriers of being nervous to not know, or feeling like I would give myself away as a secret fool if I admitted that I didn't actually know what I thought I knew, or like all of these things. And that's really just not the case. I think that's also how you're going to build really genuine relationships with faculty and instructors and people in your cohort, is when you show up from a really earnest and honest place of just genuinely wanting to engage and learn in any way you can, and not worrying about what people are thinking of you or what status people are thinking you of. Like you were accepted for a reason too. I think when people get a lot of self-doubt, which is really, really easy, and it makes a lot of sense, and like lots of imposter syndrome and stuff, I think reminding yourself that the people who are doing this selection are making informed choices and have a lot more experience in that process and that practice than you do at this time. And so to think that you could possibly know everything better than they could when they were making that decision is also to kind of undermine their experience too. So that's something that I also remind myself of when I'm like, oh my gosh, maybe I just tricked everyone and I'm really a secret fool and I got in and I was so sneaky. No, that's not the case. Who am I to assume that? And just, yeah, being honest when you don't know. That's how you're going to learn the best.
I mean, I snuck in as somebody who's not a traditional political scientist. No, no, no. No, that's a very good point, Emily. I also think too, kind of like what Fun was saying, is like the personal statement. I think part of, like, for me, it's like those personal statements that well, at least for my master's, changed my PhD's personal statement. My research is still the same. It's being able to demonstrate not only your ability to critically engage with what you've learned to be able to present a potential research topic, but also having some kind of tangibility to bolster that through your life experience. Like, why are you doing this? Like, don't just do research for the sake of research. Like, what is pushing you to do that? It could be like, because I want to know more. It could be something that, you know, that you've seen in your life or you've experienced, like being able, like, and I'm also speaking from somebody who's an autoethnographer, like, so I talk about my life quite extensively in my work, so keep that bias in mind. But it's your ability to demonstrate your capacity to learn and engage with the material, but also what is motivating you to be there, while also being able to articulate that you're amenable to other options too. Because again, going into my master's program, I was looking at colonial state violence between the police and Indigenous communities. And I walked out of that writing a paper that I'm still trying to publish on community-based research practices and the limitations that we're currently experiencing as community-based researchers. So I went in with one thing, was ready to do one thing, but things happened and it changed. So I also think having conviction in what you want to do, but not being rigid as well. And I think part of that also is what Emily was talking about, like that, letting that ego go, and being curious and saying, this is what I know, this is what I want to do, and this is what I don't know, but this is what I don't know, but I want to know. Because if you walk into any any program, whether it's a MA or into a workforce, and you walk in being like, I already know everything, I'm not gonna hire you or take you onto my master's. It's like, oh, you know everything. Like, why are you here? What are you gonna get out of this program? So again, like having that curiosity, I think, is particularly important, and being able to articulate that.
Hi, Dasha. We would love to hear your wonderful voice, but you're currently on mute.
That leads very nicely into my experience applying to a professional program. There was no research component in the personal statement, so it was all, why do you want to be here and what do you want to learn? And really thinking about the what you're going to learn by looking at the courses that are available and what you're interested in and how that relates to your professional and educational experience, and also the why. And it like dig deep, and not in a performative oppression Olympics kind of way, more in a how does my experience inform the education I want to get. And if we're going into political science or policy, those reasons are usually pretty profound, and not being afraid to be honest and sincere, and really identify the reasons for why you want to pursue a specific topic. And it not only does it increase your chance of getting into the school, once you're there, you have like a North Star, you have a reason to be there, and that can change, but being diligent about figuring it out puts you in a better spot to actually go to grad school. And once you're in grad school, if the master's is your last step and you know you don't want to go into a PhD, for me that took off a lot of pressure to just to get good marks, and instead to just learn and to pursue what was interesting, and to have a more profound educational experience. um it depends on your definition of doing well, because everyone who passes their master's does well, but the people who do the best are the ones who learn the most and change the most and get the most experience out of it. So if you know that a PhD might not be in your future, setting different metrics than grades, I think, is really valuable to get more out of the education that you're getting.
Yeah, and to touch kind of on what Dasha said, just for planning purposes, I know this is an undergrad discussion, so primarily looking at masters, but also to keep in mind too, like if you are wanting to plan for a PhD, people who are in a master's program and are applying for a PhD, like yes, there is a GPA component to that. But generally speaking, people who are applying for a PhD are already well aware of that component. And I think at that point, it's not just so much, I want to do a PhD. It's like kind of what I said earlier, like you want to have a supervisor who's going to want to work with you for the next 4 to 7, 8, 9 years of your life. You need to be able to articulate like what you are bringing to the table. Not always like why I'm a great fit because I'm so similar, but it's like, here's what I'm bringing that's going to challenge the status quo of my subfield, or political science in general. And being able to just like really articulate that for folks who are interested in a PhD. And I always like to bug the master students right now. I'm like, so how many of you are going to stay for a PhD? Like, start thinking about these questions. But you never know. You never know, right? Like there are folks who know from undergrad that they want to do a PhD. And when I almost dropped out of my undergrad in my first year. I completely dropped the ball. But I knew when I did my undergrad, I wanted to do a PhD, and I used that to really take every step I can to really strengthen my resolve, not just intellectually, but as a person, because this is a very challenging process, very challenging. So I think the type of person who really is able to get into grad school and really do well in grad school is, again, people who are able to network and have a mix of self-reliance, but also knowing when to seek help, because it is very easy to isolate yourself in this world. But I think resiliency is a huge thing.
One thing I also want to add, and I appreciate the other three panelists. contribution to the conversation is that writing is heavy as grad students. You know, you already mentioned that, Michael, right? So how to cultivate writing habits? We talked about that, right? You got to write every day. And not to say, okay, now today I'm inspired, I'm going to write 10 pages. In the next 10 days, I'm not feeling any inspiration, so I'm not going to write, right? So you got to treat writing as a daily job. I think I talked to the message course people, it's like, do not glamorize writing. It's just day job. Like every day you sit in front of a computer, even just for 30 minutes, you write, right? So, and gradually it's going to accumulate. And then writing becomes a habit rather than a kind of a barrier. And we all have experience, right? The less you write, the more you feel guilty, and there's anxiety. And these are not emotions which are good for writing. Yeah. And Emily, you know, just so enjoy what you were saying about, you know, just get rid of your ego. You know, there's always doubts like why I'm here, like I'm a, you know, I shouldn't be here. You know, if you admit it, you have every right to be there, right? So sometimes the kind of self-doubt becomes a barrier, your own enemy to succeed in the program.
I love that. Thank you, folks, for those answers. Our next question is, how do you find the experience of balancing grad school work and life outside school?
I can touch on this a little bit. It is really hard. The straightforward answer is I feel like it's pretty hard, but I have been, compared to my undergrad, I have been working so hard on being really intentional with making sure that I do have intentional social time and time doing fun things that are not related to academic work. I think I definitely used to have the mindset of, if I am not actively doing work or doing something that applies to my work, I shouldn't be doing it. And so I would kind of go into this mindset in my undergrad of really just burning myself into the ground. And it has taken a lot of really intentional mental work to remind myself that there are a lot of things in life that are capacity building, that will not look like you're doing intellectual or academic work. And that is not to say that you should trick yourself into only doing social things for the sake of bettering your intellectual and academic work. I think that is not a great or healthy path forward either. But reminding myself and reminding yourself that there is purpose outside of your academic work and your intellectual work, and that you are a human being first. And I think also reminding myself at times that as much as I am a student, that is also my job. And you wouldn't expect this from yourself if you were in a different workplace most of the time, unless you're working for a nonprofit where you'll also run yourself into the ground. But like in a pretty average workplace, you would not also be treating your workday like this, where it's every second of every single day. And a lot of the time, making sure that you take time away from your work to go do something, forget about it for a while, have fun with your friends, will actually produce better work later than if you just guiltily stare at your computer for another 4 hours when you could have gone for a 1 hour walk and then maybe gotten a snack and pet a dog and come back. You're going to be able to do a lot better than if you had put yourself kind of in mental computer jail, and been like, unless I work, I don't get to have fun. It's not going to help you. And I've learned that the hard way. But I feel like now, from September and coming into the second term of this program, I've been really intentional, and it has made a huge difference in my relationship to the work too, relationship to coursework, and then the work that I'm producing also has really benefited, and my mental health. So
I've kind of said a little bit about this earlier. It definitely, this is a thing for your master's, but also just something to be aware of when you go to your PhD is this is your job as well as school. Like, this is your life. And it will definitely, it will strain your relationships. And that's something that I'm not saying to scare people away, but it is it's an important reality to consider, that this can and will happen. Particularly at the PhD level, when I'm currently embroiled in an even more higher degree of things to do, and it does impact, you know, my personal life and my ability to engage with my friends and my family, and to have a bit of a social life. But I definitely am a huge advocate of mental health support. Every MA in this program, I have told them, like, day one, go get therapy. Not as I say that somewhat, you know, joking way, but these demands are going to take a toll on you, and having that support is particularly helpful. And again, to Emily's point, don't lock yourself in 4 hours of computer jail. I think being able to go for a walk, go for a run, do yoga, pet a dog, any kind of movement will really help you with your mental health as well. And being intentional about setting time aside. I think for me, one of the biggest mistakes I made in my master's is I was particularly isolated from my cohort. And I kept telling myself, oh, like, I'll go out with them once courses are done. And then once our courses were done and we moved to our research phase, everybody went home. And I went, oh, like, I missed out on all of those relationship building moments, and now they're gone, and I'm even more isolated because I was working every day. And whereas now in my PhD, even though I have more work all the time, I'm intentional about having at least a Saturday to myself, or if not a Saturday, a Friday, if not, or, you know, like, or if not a Friday, a Sunday, like having one day to be me as a human being. It's not ideal, but I also want to be Michael the person, not Michael the academic, Michael the paper writing machine, you know, Michael the TA. Like, I would like to be me as a person, and that helps kind of break up some of that stress of living, breathing, existing in this world all the time. As much as I love it, you do need a break every now and then. So being well aware of, you know, the amazing opportunities, but also learning how to take care of yourself, I think, is also very important.
What I would add is recommended graduation times are recommended for a reason, and taking more time is often the bravest and best decision you can make. It might be more financially difficult. It might you might need to get accommodations or something along those lines, but I'm currently recovering from like ridiculous burnout from about 3 years ago. And it's still rocking my ability to function in my life, let alone in my academics and my work. You don't want to get there. It's difficult to get out. And understanding that no one else is going to prioritize your health is very important. And understanding the ramifications of not is also really important, because you only have one life. And stress is one of the largest contributors to cardiovascular health, to decreased life expectancy. Like, taking care of yourself is so important. Under capitalism, it's tough. But we have enough agency, I think, to say no to ridiculous expectations, and carve out extra time for ourselves where possible. And like taking time to relax, to build a security net of people who will support you when it's just too hard, for not necessarily for academic reasons, but for whatever life reasons. Having someone to help you pick up the pieces is just essential, because you're not going to be able to do it alone. So yeah, take your time and find your people.
That was all such excellent advice. Thank you all for all of that. We have another question. I think this one will probably direct to you, Dr. Zhu. how does having done your undergrad at UVic affect your chances of grad school application success at UVic?
We would love to have more UVic undergrads to apply for MA. I'm just surprised that not as many UVic grads to apply for IMA program. Emily, yes. No, it does not hurt. I don't know, is there a rumor about that? Please, it does not hurt your chance that you did an undergrad at UVic, that it will hurt your chance to get into MA. Now, there is a question in the questions you sent out, Chris, about the advice of doing undergrad and MA in those one same institution. It depends on what your plan is. Like if you want to do a PhD, you can still do undergrad and the MA at UVic and then do PhD somewhere else, because it's not advised to do all 3 degrees in one institution, right? Because, people might think that, wow, you haven't gone anywhere else, and it's considered, well, usually it's advised that you go to a different institution for at least one of the 3 degrees, because there's a sense that you can be exposed to different schools of thinking, etc. So it's okay to do 2 degrees in one institution, no question.
Yeah, and I think that perspective is definitely starting to be challenged a bit. I know U Ottawa, for example, has some faculty that are undergrad, master's, PhD faculty, all U Ottawa. So there are some exceptions. Not that it's a generally advisable option, but I think part of the tradition of academia is to go as far and as wide as you can to instill all these different ideas and perspectives. But I also think too, as somebody who stayed within the institution for my master's to PhD, but I is gone from a different program, I think is also enough of a differentiation for me in the job market. Because sure, I'm at the same institution, but the people I'm working with and the skills that I'm gaining and the schools of thought that I'm engaging with is so radically different than what I did in my MA. And there are universities and other institutions that allow for that breadth of knowledge to be diverse in how they're organized. But yeah, I would definitely attest, at least in my field in Indigenous politics, because there's only so many places we can go right now, that far and wide advice is definitely being challenged a little bit. And I think too, like you're seeing that with PhDs who are being taken up in faculty positions from institutions that they get their PhD from. So, that attitude is changing a little bit, which for me is nice for job stability, potentially down the road. I'm not saying that I'm going to end up at UVic or even in poli-sci if I end up at UVic. But for me down the road, it's nice to know that UVic isn't an instant no for me just because I did 2 programs here. But yeah, I think that advice is a little bit in flux between a different generation of scholar with their advice, and also that older perception, I think, is like in my experience where I've run up, where I've heard both ends of the argument, and I think both ends are valid.
Please tell your peers to apply for MA at UVic. I often wondered, like, why we haven't seen many UVic undergrads to apply for MA here,
I think there is still kind of that like weird myth of like you shouldn't do your master's at the place that you did your undergrad. But yeah, as you guys kind of talked about, that's definitely changing for good reason. So yeah, All right, seeing as we're almost at 6:30, I think we'll just do a final call for questions from our audience, and if not, we'll just wrap up here. Oh, cute.
Yeah, thanks everyone. That was really awesome. I am curious about how much is a good offer for funding across schools, or like if you applied at multiple schools. Yeah. Or what's an average at least?
I can't speak too much to this because I actually only applied to UVic. But I believe cumulatively, like I was offered a TA-ship for a preset amount for the amount of hours, and then an RA-ship for again a preset amount, and then just like entrance entrance money. And I believe, am I allowed to say what it was? Are there any rules about that, Dr. Xu? I don't know, actually. I think it's fine.
There's no rule, but your situation is not the same as everybody else, right?
Okay.
Everybody has different package because
Okay.
of ISHIP, this and that. It's hard. I mean, I kind of understand why Q would like to ask, but I think it all depends on different places you're going to be at, the cost of living, you know, tuition fee, all these are taken into consideration. So I know it's a non-answer, Q.
You're also allowed to negotiate. I don't know how much negotiating happens in the master's, but in the PhD, you can absolutely negotiate to be like, I would rather go here than U of T or, this other program at this institution, but like you need to sweeten the pot a bit. So you can negotiate to potentially pull some money out. And whether that's not in raw funding, which in the current political climate of institutions, there isn't a lot of raw funds available. But asking for guarantee TA ships, RA ships, co-ops. Those are opportunities for you to potentially have a funding offer, commit money in just non-raw money. But I think it's fair for a funding offer. I mean, I was particularly lucky in my MA to have really good funding. But at the very least, like your tuition should hopefully not be a huge problem. Some institutions will just like in a sense waive your tuition. Like it depends. Each institution has different processes for grad school. Some might still charge you by course, some might give you a flat fee. But I think if you're getting multiple offers, you can go where the most money is. But if the offers are somewhat comparable, plus or minus some money, and you would rather go somewhere else, you can be like, hey, I want to stay at UVic, but like U of T is offering me this. What can you do about this? Because I would rather be at UVic. Like you're allowed to play ball a bit.
But there are limits, right?
Yes.
If there's
there are
no,
limits. Yeah, don't expect it to be like, oh yeah, we'll give you $30,000 more. Like that's not going to happen. And again, particularly the masters, I don't know how that works, or how much, but you can massage it a little bit. I'm sorry, Fun. I'm not trying to make your life more miserable as the grad advisor who's had to deal with this before, but it is a thing. It is, so just keep that in mind.
also BC is not great because it doesn't have the equivalent, like in Ontario, they have OGS, Ontario Graduate Scholarship, right? You can apply for if you're Canadian. But when I moved to UVic, initially I just could not understand. It's like, what was going on? Like, why were we so poorly funded? And then I realized the provincial government does not have a provincial graduate scholarship that students can apply for, in addition to applying for SHIRK that we talked about, because that's federal funding and there's the provincial government funding. So Dasha, you will know about that.
Yeah, we have OGS, but for my program, the one of the conditions of the funding I was offered was if I get OGS, then my scholarship would be returned to the university. So I got half my tuition covered, and since it's a professional program, there's pretty limited scholarships outside of that. But there are TA-ships and RA-ships and more affordable housing options that are available. It's a question of how. It's also a question of how much you're willing to pay for your education, like what your hard line is and what's in your financial means. And that's also something that's really important to understand, and what the payback period on something like that's going to be.
Yeah, in BC, there's the BCGS, which is a decent chunk of money, but you only get it for your first year, and not everybody gets it, right?
No, yeah,
yeah,
Michael, I want to correct that because there's only one.
yeah, you only get the
Okay.
one, and it's either you get it when you apply, or you don't get it again, right?
No,
'Cause
and
you can't get
yes,
the second year onward, yeah.
no, it's nothing like OGS. OGS is you apply, right? And there are more than one. Yeah, BC one is not the same at
Yeah,
all.
it's just a fancy entrance scholarship. And yeah, again, to Dasha's point too, like there are potentialities. It's particularly common in Canadian institutions to, if you get like a big scholarship like a SHIRK, or like a PhD, if you get like the Vanier or the Trudeau scholarship, there are instances where your graduate stipend you get from your institution gets clawed back, because you've now exceeded that. So that's also something to keep in mind too. They might do that if you get like a master SHIRK, I'm not sure. But yeah, that's just something that's pretty standard across the board in Canadian institutions. So also something to consider too.
Well, I know that if you apply for professional school like Dasha, like a law school, they don't have undergraduates, right? So TA position will be very limited. Maybe there's none. So that's a consideration. And I think iGov does not have undergraduates. So if you
No,
are the PhD, you won't get TA position.
yeah, for my iGov, I TA'd, but that's because I responded to the job postings that got filtered out to me. But yeah, like that's a good point. Some programs don't have undergrads, so you're not going to be able to be guaranteed a TA-ship.
Yeah, public and main, same, no, So there's no guaranteed TA-ship, right? You might be able to answer to an ad for TAs in some other departments, but it's not guaranteed.
Alrighty. Thank you guys so much. It is now time that we are probably going to wrap up this wonderful info session. So if Chris would like to take it away, that would be amazing. Chris, we can't hear you. We want to hear your lovely voice. Thank you.
Sorry. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to our panelists for participating tonight, sharing your experiences, your expertise with us. Thanks to everyone for coming out. I also want to say just a quick shout out to everyone on the team who put this event together. I couldn't have done it without you guys. Just on one final note, I want to plug Career Night, which is going to be happening 2 weeks from now on March 20th, from 6 to 7:30 over Zoom as well. So it'll be pretty much the same thing as tonight, just like a couple panelists from different career backgrounds talking about what you can do with a poli-sci degree. So yeah, keep an eye out on the UPS Instagram for more information. And I'll just quickly pass it over to Skyla to talk about our elections coming up too.
Yes, our spring election is happening on not March 12th, on March 29th, with the deadline to run 24 hours prior to the polls opening, as well as if you'd like any additional information on what board of directors that are available positions, we highly recommend following us on Instagram again, and refreshing your emails for more information. Yes, Dasha.
This is a federal public service plug for poli-sci students. There's a link in the chat. It's for FSWEP. It's only available for non-final year students. And it's one of the only ways to get into a government job that doesn't require 2 years of screening time. So this is a very time-limited opportunity. Share widely. For this year, the period might be closed, but next year, definitely apply. It's really great opportunities for the specific career path.
Thank you so much. We will send it out to our UPS email. Okay. Thank you folks so very much and have a lovely rest of your evening.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.